Здравствуйте и добро пожаловать в Comic Game! Я Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm speaking Russian because I'm looking at the 2003 series Superman Red Sun. Red Sun is what you could call an Elseworld story, meaning that it takes particular characters and mythos that already exist and puts them in a unique, self-contained world where the slightest change ends up creating a drastically different outcome. For about a decade, DC Comics even had an imprint just for these stories called Elseworlds, and it brought us things like a steampunk Batman, superheroes mixed with early German expressionist films, a story where Batman became Green Lantern, and a story where Superman became Batman. It also brought us Red Sun, a story where writer Mark Millar asked what if, by the small chance of a few hours in the Earth's rotation, Superman landed in Nebelshaya Derevnya, Ukraine, instead of Smallville, Kansas. Then, add on top of that, Superman growing up through all the years that, in real time, his comic had actually run leading up to the release of this series. Meaning that he grew up not in post-Iron Curtain Russia like when the comic came out, but the heyday of Soviet Russia. This means he grew up embracing communist values instead of capitalistic democratic ones, at the height of the Cold War. This gives us a ripe formula for making a drastically different character, so let's see just how this Soviet Superman turned out and take this away. The comic begins not as early as I would expect, with Superman being found as a baby. Instead, it begins with him having already grown to adulthood. He has begun to discover his superpowers and has moved to Moscow in lieu of Metropolis to be a better Superman. But he doesn't take up newspaper reporting. In fact, Comrade Superman has no use for secret identities. He simply is Superman all the time, working directly under Stalin, who has taken to seeing him as kind of a son, even over other actual sons that he has, like his chief of police, Pyotr, who is one of many illegitimate sons. I find it really very interesting that Stalin isn't portrayed in this series as just some villainous caricature of an evil communist. Instead, he's shown to be reasonable, rational, and even a bit jovial. Almost like a Soviet Santa. Or Soviet Colonel Sanders, which, believe it or not, is also a thing. Yeah, that's an actual DC comic. Also interesting to note is that Superman is not being portrayed as a supervillain. Aside from his gray and reds replacing his blue and reds, and his hammer and sickle replacing his usual S, he still seems to be the same person. So he's still out saving lives, and without need of hiding his secret identity, saving lives seems to be his one and only focus in life. Not that this stops America, gripped with Cold War Red Scare panic, from assuming the absolute worst about the man of socialist steel. Especially after Russia airs this announcement newsreel about their big hero, which Millar conceives as a direct knockoff of the old 1950s Superman TV show intro. I was going to make a truth, justice, and the American way joke, but Millar already did it for me, and so much better than I probably would have. Full of red fear, the US government turns to their greatest scientist, Lex Luthor, for help. Lex cannot turn his brain off, as is shown while he arrogantly plays chess against multiple opponents while reading Machiavelli and listening to a portable tape player that he claims to have invented that morning, when both the tape player and the cassette tape shouldn't exist for at least another decade or so. Luthor immediately sets to work with his government grant, at first buying primarily puzzles, but later with actual solutions. The first of these required him crashing a Soviet satellite straight on Metropolis itself. Like with Superman, Luthor is presented as basically the same character as his regular counterpart, just in a different situation that creates different results. So he's still pretty villainous, but those efforts here will be celebrated as heroic regardless. Superman, of course, stops the satellite from crashing, as Luthor knew he would, though in doing so creates a situation where the giant globe on the top of the Daily Planet is knocked over to fall down to the street below. Superman proves how he's still a good guy by saving the innocent Americans about to be crushed by the globe, also giving a brief meeting with Lois Lane. There's a bit of a groaner line here about how this led to fanfics about a universe where Superman was American and fell in love with Lois Lane, a notion Soviet Soups dismisses as silly. And hey, by the way, Daily Planet, maybe stop making giant person-crushing globes and putting them precariously on the top of your giant building. Just a thought. Luthor is able to use the data he gets from the satellite to create an imperfect clone of Superman, creating the Red Sun version of Bizarro. As many of the best versions of Bizarro have been, he's kind of a tragic, confused hero. who starts out being seen as a monster, even by the British, who aren't communists themselves, but still side with the devil they know. Especially after he punches Superman through some buildings, racking up an abnormally high body count for a Superman comic. But Bizarro ends up playing the hero, sacrificing himself to stop a nuclear warhead from going off and killing more people. This is just the beginning, though, of what will become a new superhero Cold War. Luthor will create many more Red Sun versions of famous Superman villains, including Parasite, Metallo, Satanus, and Jacuzzi Suit Man. Man, that looks comfortable. I want a jacuzzi suit. Somebody make me a jacuzzi suit. Stat! But Superman's primary confrontation at this part of the story won't come from Luthor himself. It'll come from within Russia. By this point, Superman has become El Presidente of Russia, or whatever you call that in Russian. This came about because Stalin was poisoned to death, and much like regular Superman with his adoptive father, this Superman was just not fast enough to stop the poison from consuming Russia's Man of Steel. There is a brief hint, it seems, that Pyotr may have poisoned his own father, which he is about to admit to Superman just before Stalin dies, and just after he describes having murdered the parents of a young man with cold, calculating eyes. With Stalin dead, the party's politicians are pushing for Superman to replace him. Initially, he refuses, but after seeing the plight of the people firsthand, particularly in the plight of a young woman he once loved, the Ukrainian Lana Lang, I suppose, Superman decides it's time for him to bring an iron grasp to the Iron Curtain. Well, his version sounds much less evil. Not everyone is happy with their alien overlord, though, and that includes Russian Batman. I fucking love that fuzzy hat. Ushanka Batman is the little kid with the cold eyes that Pyotr was talking about earlier, now all grown up and ready to fight the system. And he does, first by V for Vendetta-ing a bunch of government buildings, and then by kidnapping Pyotr. He does this by pretending to be his driver, then crashing his car into the river and dragging him to a secret underground base filled with awesome Americana knickknacks and devil pig statues. But this kidnapping isn't for revenge. It seems Pyotr's been asking around to meet with the Batman, because he has a plan. Well, Lex Luthor has a plan, and that plan involves Wonder Woman. With Russia being the biggest superpower in the world, thanks to Superman, Diana Prince's introduction to the world of men is through Russia instead of America. She falls kind of hard for Superman, it seems, but he assumes she's not interested in that kind of thing, and so nothing ever happens between them. Which is kinda sad, because the Batman manages to use her magic lasso to capture her, and then sends out a bat signal using some fireworks intended for a Superman birthday celebration. Oh man, look at Soups doing the classic pulling his shirt open to reveal his chest symbol. And hey, a reference to the old Captain Marvel villain, Dr. Sivana. Soups shows up to fight Batman, expecting this to be a quick fight like all of them, but instead, Batman has his own birthday surprise for Superman. He quickly shows the man how his machine kills fascists. But this Batman, like any good Batman, doesn't kill. So instead of pressing his advantage and killing Superman, he instead attempts to trap him in a cell of red sunlight. But Superman convinces Wonder Woman to break her magic lasso, freeing her from Batman's control and letting her free the Man of Steel. Batman doesn't take defeat lightly though, and sets off a bomb he swallowed to take himself before Superman can punish him. With her magic lasso destroyed and no longer able to sustain her youth, Diana shows her true age, growing immediately old before our eyes. Luthor's final attempt to bring down Superman has to do with Brainiac. Brainiac had come to Earth before, shrinking away the city of Stalingrad and trapping it in a bottle, a reference to Kandor, a Kryptonian city suffering the same fate in the regular universe. Much like Kandor, Superman is never able to return Stalingrad to its regular size, and his failure for those people weighs heavily on his mind as the years go by. Brainiac was apparently supposed to grab Moscow, but for reasons never really explained, he doesn't. Superman, in return, grabs Brainiac and brings him back to the USSR to reprogram him. This leads to him further reprogramming anyone who disagrees with his rule, turning them basically into robots. Between his super abilities and Brainiac's robotic intelligence, Superman is able to make the Soviet states the most efficient, most powerful nations in the entire world, and domino effects his way across the globe until every country but America joins his new world order. America gets close to falling apart, with certain states segregating and the streets full of rioting and hungry people as the economy of the nation collapses. And then Luthor becomes president. Suddenly, America turns itself around, though it seems Luthor might be an even stricter dictator than his Soviet counterpart. Luthor pushes his America to a strength and prosperity not seen before, and it gets to the point that Superman, goaded on by Brainiac's suggestions, realizes that his only recourse left for total world domination is to bring war to America. Luthor anticipated this turn though and shows up to Superman's fortress of solitude to match wits with him. But Brainiac is all like, that's a bad idea, and just grabs Luthor and throws him into the Superman robot reprogrammer. Well, that was over quickly. So Supes and Brainiac fly out to America to begin their conquering, facing down the Amazons in Luthor's version of the Green Lantern Corps, in new versions of Luthor's created anti-Superman. Wait, that's Doomsday. I guess I didn't think about it, but I guess he would be here, and really he should be enough to stop Superman on his own. Oh well, we don't have time for that. Superman gets to the White House and asks Lois, who is married to Luthor in this universe, to vacate the area. But it seems Luthor was prepared for exactly this scenario and left a note with Lois that he promised would do in one sentence what he has failed to do with weapons and plans for half a century now. The note, which says simply, "Why don't you put the whole world in a bottle?" actually does exactly that, making Superman realize he's not saving the world, he's bullying it. But Brainiac doesn't like this plot twist and chooses to defy orders to continue conquering the world. What even Brainiac couldn't have foreseen though is that Luthor expected to be pulled inside Brainiac's ship, and uses his new vantage point to stop Brainiac, who he apparently realized long ago was the true threat. Luthor and Superman work together to stop Brainiac, who is revealed to have a failsafe for this contingency where the 6 black holes powering his ship will explode. I don't think that makes any sense in terms of physics, but this is a comic about a man who punches robots in his underwear, so yeah, why argue? So Superman follows in the steps of his copy, saving the world by sacrificing himself and flying the explosive deep into outer space. With Superman and Brainiac gone, Luthor leads the world into a new age of prosperity. Lifetimes are expanded to centuries, cultures grow and develop, humanity masters the stars, and peace reigns. Superman, who it turns out didn't die, watches it all happen up until far, far in the future, when some distant ancestor of Luthor's begins to warn everyone about a dying planet. Nobody will listen though, but like any true Luthor, he has a plan. A plan to send his only son on a rocket ship back into the distant past. Which brings us to the breakdown. Yeah, I love this comic. I love all the references to Superman things, from the little ones like this throwaway line mentioning the toy maker and prankster by their real names, or this tiny background image of my favorite Superman family member, Crypto the Superdog. To the obvious in-your-face stuff like this Great Caesar's ghost from Perry in a room filled to bursting with DC references, or this riot scene that's a nod to the first issue of Action Comics. I love that they use Stalingrad instead of Kandor, a minor detail that probably barely sticks out, but using Kandor would have risked giving away the ending. I love the reversal of roles of Superman as villain and Luthor as the hero, while keeping most of their personalities that we're already familiar with intact. I'm absolutely fascinated by how they decided that so much of the DC Comics universe was, essentially, inevitable. Wonder Woman, obviously, has every reason to be the same, but I think it's interesting how the Green Lanterns gotta be familiar faces, while Batman came into existence despite being someone entirely different. But what I especially love is how Millar decided to not just make this some flag-waving communist star evil story, but instead uses almost humorously ridiculous sounding setup to create something thoughtful, serious, and different, while still maintaining a lot of the heart and humor that makes any Superman story good. I've seen a lot of people say this comic is proof that superhero comics can be more political and meaningful, but I disagree. I think instead it's proof that they already are political and meaningful. The reason this comic works is because all the cultural and social and political messages that they play with in this one are already present in normal superhero comics. But those messages are so prevalent already in our society that we don't even notice them. This series holds up a mirror to those values and says, do they still look good to you now? And that's why this comic really is so truly great. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. This is one of the especially rare comics that I think everyone should read once in their lifetime. Not just comic fans, everyone. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope a comic about Russia gets you nice and in the mood for a cold, frozen winter. I only got 2 more weeks of episodes until the new year, so I hope you're excited, because I know I am. Make sure to stick around for next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.